Welcome to the Informed Simplicity Project, a place for students seeking the informed simplicity on the far side of complexity. Today in the office I have Rana, PhD, founder and executive director of the Joshua Center, a counseling agency, a trainer in emotionally focused therapy, and co-host of the Leading Edge podcast for EFT, as well as the Leading Edge podcast for leadership. I'm so excited to have him in the office. Ryan, is there anything else you would like to add?
Yeah, man, that's pretty good. I mean, I was on faculty for counseling or marriage and family therapy for 10 years at three different universities in different roles. And then we started our own private practice for 10 years. So it's been a learning experience for sure.
Yeah.
A lot of learning comes from failure. So that's been a good teacher for me. My faith is a big piece of it too, in terms of why we do this. But that's how to introduce myself. What else do you want to know?
What three universities have you taught at?
Yeah, so I taught maybe seven courses or so at the University of Louisiana Monroe as a grad assistant down there, and then I taught for Harding. Taught two courses for Harding, man, a long time ago. I don't even know when that was now. And then I taught for John Brown University, part and full time for about 7 years.
Wow,
So yeah,
you've done the full spread,
yeah,
student to professor.
yeah, for
So,
sure.
and you're also doing trainings now, right? You're with EFT and EFT trainer.
I am. Yeah, yeah, sure am.
How is that different than the teaching in the classroom?
And there's a lot of overlap. I certainly wish I'd known then what I know now. I'd be a lot better as a faculty. Um, I think there's a lot of pressure on faculty members to not be specific, and to not follow one model, which makes sense because your students need a breadth of understanding, if for no other reason, to pass national licensure exams, but also to have a breadth to understand the whole field. But it's also tragic because most people don't enter this profession to have a breadth of knowledge or to just understand research methods and multiculturalism and those things, although they are important. Most people enter this profession to be able to go into hard situations and create change and healing. And that's the part that kind of drives me crazy. That doesn't get near enough airtime. So in my EFT work, I can just focus on that, really how to become an agent of change, and really teaching the map that comes with EFT, which is incredibly refined. I can talk more about that if you want or not. But that's the main thing for me is it allows me to really, really just lean into what I think is the point of this for most people, which is to really, really bring around is to really, really enter dark places to bring about change and healing.
Yeah, that's so important, and we talked about this a little bit with my own story and to some of the reading and research that I've done on how to become an expert. And I guess let's start from the basic, right? Because let's just say that you're going to design your own grad program, and you've had some experience, and you've also had experience in different facets. So, like, where would you start? Like, what would be like the first thing that, you know, I don't know, Elon Musk wants to also sponsor not just space, but also like mental health, right?
Yeah,
And so he says, okay, I'm gonna go to you, Ryan. You can do whatever you want.
man, that's a good question. I know you're going to ask that. That's good. I mean, I think I would not teach any theory till the second or third semester. I would really want a combination of like foundational truths of like ethics and like introduction to being a professional, and then building into therapeutic alliance and really, really understand the importance, matching attunement stuff, which we cover really, really quickly in EFT. It'd be nice if people had a year of that. And then coming alongside self stuff. So your own attachment history, areas, really, really doing your trauma assessments extensively. People say sending um, counseling students need to go to counseling, which I think is good, but I think that's even kicking the can down the road a little bit because 1 hour a week is often not exhaustive in terms of the growth I want to see. So I'd love to see that be done for a semester or two, and then start seeing clients actually, and then teach the models as you work or the second half of the process. But I mean, for me, it's like I would really want to empower my faculty to get practical and get specific, and particularly I would want to spend 35% of the program on how you're going to handle defenses, resistance, or blocks as we call them, because that's really what predicts this. You got to have a map. You got to be able to show up for people with all your heart. And then the next piece is, what are you going to do when they block you?
Yeah.
That to me, that's what really makes a great therapist. As well as, I want to add one piece. When I talk about showing up with your heart, you got to be clear on why you're doing this. If you're not doing this for the right reasons, you're not going to do your best work and you won't last. I mean, the burnout rate of therapists is 7-8 years. So that's what I think, man. At the top of my head, I could probably do more of that
Yeah.
some other time.
No, that makes sense. That's how Top Gun was started, right? You had these military fighter pilots who had to get better because they were in wartime.
That's right.
And they said, okay, in the past, we've put people in schools and it hasn't worked. So let's just run dogfights all day, watch tape all night, and after we review the tape, we go and practice something new.
I love
Like,
it.
that's what they do instead of, studying aerodynamics or
Yeah.
studying flight
Yeah.
mechanics. Like,
Yeah.
they just run it and run it and run it and run it, and
That's what I want to see.
they hit huge gains.
That's I love what you're saying. That's what we're missing right now, and I think it's a crisis actually, because mental health needs have never been bigger, especially the hardest kind of therapy, couples, trauma, addiction, those kind of things. It's never been more of a need, and yet our counseling programs they're in some ways shrinking in terms of the amount of touch, the amount of contact faculty have with students for financial reasons or whatever. Everything's becoming more and more part-time. And to me, it's a problem. So I love that's exactly what I think we should be doing. Just
Yeah.
what you just said.
Yeah. And you were also talking about some of the essentials, like knowing why you're in this. What do you feel like are some of the essentials?
Yeah, I mean, we wrote this pyramid. I think I shared it with you. You were there that day, of what predicts a therapist's ability to really stay engaged, to do their best work, and specifically what knocks them off course. And I'm just looking at it right now. The fourth one is, do you really love people? If you really don't love people, if your heart doesn't break when theirs is breaking, if it doesn't matter to you too much, that's going to come across. You won't do your best work, and you're gonna burn out. And so that's the question. I think it can be different answers for different people. I don't think it necessarily has to be some kind of faith thing. I think it's good for people. If that creates more love for you, then that's a great source. I think it can sometimes be your own story, or maybe you had some kind of redemptive experience when you were in your darkest moment and you want to pay that back. But if there's not some kind of tie, some kind of access to a fountain of energy that creates love, then none of the rest of this really makes sense. And I've seen that done before. I've seen people who are doing these things and have good technique, but it's not really coming from love. And I've also seen people who started that way and just lost it somewhere. And it's easy to do. You can become cynical, you can become burnout, and get mismatched with sort of that fountain or access place of love that's not coming through you anymore. So I think you have to know why you're doing this. I really would encourage grad students to write it out extensively in detail, exactly why you're doing this, because there'll be days when you'll need to come back and read that. And if you don't have love, if it's not coming from a place of love, it's not going to work. It won't last. So that's what I think.
Yeah. I have friends who often say, "Man, I could never do what you do."
Yeah.
Because I just get so burnt out listening to people's stories.
Yeah.
And these are people who I know also care deeply.
Mm-hmm.
So how would you mitigate on the other side of that, right? Students coming into a program, hearing maybe things they haven't ever heard before, and it just crushes them. And because they are sort of empathic or tuned into other people, how would you handle that on the other side?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question too. I think it's normal. I think some of this is acquisition too. I don't think it's natural to come in and have like a regular life and then step in these closed door rooms for hours at a time and hear this unbelievable tragedy of abuse and these horrible things, people's darkest places, and it not affect you. So I think it's really normal for that to be a couple years before you develop the muscles to be able to go in and hear 6 sexual abuse cases and then one person's suicidal, and you dismiss them and then go in the next room and make a joke with your colleague, right? It's a muscle to be able to do that, to be able to be fully present when you're there, and then fully present somewhere else when you're somewhere else. So I don't think grad students should expect themselves to be able to do that. So a little bit of self-compassion, but also know you got to be working towards that. I don't know if it's like, well, some people are just more born to do it, and others, I'm like, maybe. I don't know. I've not noticed that. I think people can learn to do it if they want to, but it goes back to why you're doing it. And I think then once you're experienced, it's about figuring out the rhythm of how much you can engage, what works for you. For me, once I get started, I'd rather just see 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 in a row. Some people are like, if I see more than 2 in a row, I'm not any good. I've got to have a half an hour off. And I think that's a great thing to be paying attention to. So I think it's. I don't know if I mentioned your question when you say the word mitigation. You want to explain that more?
I think that's a great answer. Right?
Okay.
Part of what you're saying is you need to be able to know where you are as a person and what you can handle. Part of that's also just letting yourself sort of ease into it. Therapy is, I think you're right. It's a very odd thing.
Yeah.
I started off doing in-home therapy, which is bizarre.
Yeah.
To have a, I don't know, 23-year-old come into your house and try to help you be a better parent. You know what I mean?
I
When
do.
there are any number of other things going on.
Yeah.
That's just an odd sort of place to even work, and so yeah, I think we all have to just. I don't think this. I think the strange thing though is grad students can come in all ages, and so it's not how old you are. In my experience, it's where you are in your own process.
Mm-hmm.
A
Mm-hmm.
50-year-old coming into a house has to give herself just as much leeway as a 23-year-old, male
Yep.
going into a house for the first time.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes an older person can start to trust in the wrong thing, right? They can start to trust that because they have life experience that they can give content and it'll work. And then they find out the hard way it's not true. This is not about giving advice. I'm not saying you can't share a little piece of wisdom every once in a while, but as a rule, you've got to learn to pay attention to process. And a 20-year-old can go work with a 60-year-old if the 23-year-old is clear on the map of how they do things and can look at process. And so I agree completely. I think both of those can bring different strengths and weaknesses to the table as they're learning the process of therapy. But trusting the process work is hard to do. It's so American maybe, or Western, or maybe it's just human nature to see someone fall in a hole and to want to reach over and give them the advice that we think worked for us. But that's also very dangerous because that person's going back in the next 100 holes. You've got to be with them as a human, and then you've got to find a way to dance with their process to help them find it for themselves. And that's hard to trust in.
Is that what you would say was one of the big blocks? Earlier, you're talking about how we can kind of get derailed by some of the really big blocks that we face.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you want to get specific in the clinical work, process work is not popular. That's not what anyone expects. I know that one of my main referral people is, he's always like, well, when you're counseling them to give them this or this, and I'm like, we don't do that. Did you think that's what I do? And so it's a misconception of what we do. So clients want solutions. They want to roll out. I mean, what really happens is clients roll out their problem in the form of themes and philosophy. And then what they expect is you to give them solutions. So it's like we're the Wizard of Oz. So if you're going to break that and stay at the process level, you're going to get used to resistance from clients, even frustration. But it's not the same as, well, just be a good listener. That's bad therapy. That's a good bartender, perhaps. So we're somewhere in between solution provision and just being a listener. It's like we're very engaged, but we're engaged at the process level. For me, it's trying to create new experience of self and other, corrective experience right in my office. That's what my model, my map informs me to go for. So yeah, I do think that's one of the blocks. In my model, we talk a lot about the solution, the SPT, the solution provision trap, which is like you got it, you hear the story and they're like, okay, here's some advice. But people that are clinically stuck can't install advice. good advice is not hard to come by. I mean, you can Google everything in the world right now. So, we're not advice dispensers. Um, so I think that is definitely one of the blocks that comes forward. I think if you know how to go to deeper work, then you're going to get into different blocks, which are more advanced, which takes a higher level of training. But that's certainly one of them early on. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. When you talk about process, I think
Hmm.
some people might not be clear on what you mean by that.
Yeah. Process is just looking at, for instance, if someone comes to me, if a couple, I do a lot of couples work, and says, we're having sexual dysfunction, and they lay out these details, and what they're giving me is narratives. Well, I'm high drive, he's low drive, and what they're giving me, they're not telling me what's really going on. They're telling me the narrative that they've constructed about what's going on. So my first question, I mean, obviously you're going to do assessment, but I've got to get an answer to the question. When you two try to discuss sexuality, how does your conversation go? And that's what I'm looking for, is what is their process that they use to try to address this that doesn't work. And so and that would be some form of a pursue withdrawal cycle in that situation. But yeah, so just staying with the approach, the paradigm that they're using, which encompasses cognitive, behavioral, and emotional, um, towards the problem, as opposed to, okay, here's some techniques that you could use, or, oh, you just need to accept that your partner's high or low, or let me mediate this dispute. That'd be a content. Process, I'm staying with what is their pattern that they get into as they try to approach this situation. And so trusting the process is a much higher level of skill. It takes more of a refined therapist to be able to do that. But it's no question more effective and much less likely to create recidivism and relapse and things like that. So you can't solve second order stuckness with first order interventions
You know,
or skills.
it's like that Einstein quote: "You can't solve a problem at the same level of thinking that created it."
That's
Right?
right. He also says the only knowledge in the world is experience. And that's right. You can't give people information only and expect change to last. It's life. Therapy is like riding a bike. You got to get out there with them, and you got to catch them a few times, and sometimes they hit the ground, and you got to pick them back up and reassure them. But therapy, in my view, therapy needs to be like riding the bike. We do way too much talking about things and like, let's do it now. So if someone says they're anxious and we get caught trying to solve their anxiety while the anxiety's in the parking lot, we got to get the anxiety in our office, get it alive in the body right in front of them, and engage there for a corrective experience. So that's something I like to push for.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a fundamentally different way of working. And I have there's a few people who I like. I went to a conference, I don't know, 3 years ago, I want to say, out in California, the Evolution of Psychotherapy conference. And one of the things that was evident to me was all these people who are uh, sort of leaders in different areas of therapy. The ones who it seemed evident to me were always who were good at what they did. They were always very experiential. Even the CBT people. I had personally written off CBT for a long time, and then I saw, I don't know, Aaron Beck's daughter, I forget what her name was, do a session. She was doing role plays for half the live session, and I'm like, wow. Like to me, that seems to be a fundamental
It's
part.
a little more than cognition, though, isn't
Yeah,
it?
it was totally different than what I thought of.
Yeah.
Almost like using a board to just go through thoughts, like
Uh-huh.
identify distortions. No,
Uh-huh.
she was running it constantly.
Nice.
So,
Nice.
what about on the other side?
Mhm.
What do you feel like? So unfortunately, Elon Musk hasn't called you
No,
yet.
not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet.
We're still waiting.
Yeah.
Um, and so most of us have to go through some sort of grad program.
Yeah.
Then we have to get out. And one of the things that I've seen, which I think is speaks to what you talked about, is a lot of people get out, they get some job, they feel like they don't know what they're doing.
Right.
Then they go and get some sort of certification, whether it's EMDR,
Yeah.
whether it's brain spotting, whether
Yeah.
it's TBRI, whether it's EFT, whatever it is. Um, and then they kind of run through that loop until they find something that really resonates with them.
Yeah.
But the other side of that is, we know from the research that a lot of therapists actually don't improve over time.
Right.
So for someone who's post grad school, trying to get better, trying to help people, their heart
Yeah.
is in the right place. Like, what would you say is something that they can do to like improve?
Yeah, I mean, there's a little bit of war right now between those of us, and I put myself in this camp, who are doing post grad trainings, post grad certifications. There's a little bit of war between faculty members and these groups. In some ways, I guess. I don't really know why, to be honest with you. I don't even see it as competition, but I think they're good. I wish it'd been around when I came out. When I finished grad school, it's like, okay, go find a supervisor who shows up and kind of has coffee, kind of tells you what he or she thinks about one of your cases. And it's like, wow, that there's, I'll tell you this. Let me tell you the most expensive thing in the world is not being clear at your map as a therapist. Because if you're not clear on exactly what and why you're doing it, then your range is going to be really, really limited. You'll only help people who just really like you. I mean, therapeutic alliance is a powerful thing, but you won't be able to help stuck people. So my real answer is a process answer. Do whatever you got to do to get extremely clear on your map. This is my bias coming through. I respect and appreciate other people who are kind of like, yeah, I do 5 or 6 different things. But inside, I'm like, you probably don't. You probably don't. It takes, 4 to 7 years to learn one model. So people that think they're going to do 5, like you're doing pieces of all 5. And if you talk to the people who made those models and saw what you were doing, they would not be happy with you. So I'm a big fan of, try to really be considerate about what you think you might like and go get all of it. I will say this, I learned this from a grad student when I was a professor in year number 2, so it's pretty early on. He was in my theories class. He picked the strategic model, so Jay Haley, right? So he's like, what do you think? I'm like, go get it. Like, no, really, go get it. So for a year, he read like 6 books on it and flew to DC. I think he trained with Chloe Maddonis or somebody. He's like all about every one of his sessions in practicum. He was getting all kinds of pushback from his professors, which is ridiculous and almost unethical, by the way, for a professor not to honor what you're doing and try to work with your model. And, after 2 or 3, he changed his mind. I think he went narrative. And you know what? He was really good at narrative because he understood one all the way. And that point, the distinctions with his new model became more clear. So I think go deep, get really, really clear on a map, knowing you can always tweak this later. You might can be a good integrationist if you have one model really, really deep. But I think the post grad trainings are really good.
You like them?
I do.
Yeah.
Well, when I say I like them, when I look down my hall and I see someone who gets really, really into one of these, they get excited. Their work is better. They're not as burnt out. They're always like, ooh, there's this cool training coming up in Tampa, and I'm going to save up my money and go to brain spotting or EFT or whatever it is. They're just more refreshed. I see people who just kind of mow along and do the same old thing for 8 years, and they're all thinking about, I think I've had enough of this. So I think that's one piece, is it just re-energizes you. But secondly, to get really, really clear on your map is important. I won't win all my cases, but I can tell you exactly why I lose them without just blaming my clients. It's easy to be like, oh, well, they have issues. Like, I know they have issues. That's why they're clients. So I think do whatever you got to do to get clear on your map, and then I think it energizes you, and get specific about why you're doing what you're doing. Get mentorship. Problem is mentorship's hard to find. It's really, really hard to find. So
Especially after the supervision phase, it's so hard, and then sometimes it can be expensive.
yeah,
You know,
for sure.
so
It's also expensive to not be effective. That's more expensive than the training, though. If you're not effective, that'll cost you a lot of money. So I think it's kind of holding this balance of how much am I going to invest in this. I had I had a potential trainee contact me on Facebook about a training that I was doing. And I spent a lot of time with this person to say, because he's like, I want to see couples. I hear, what you're doing's good. I'm like, all right, come on. And then he emails back and he goes, oh, this is expensive. And he's like, I think I'll just use the tools I have. And he was surprised because I just replied back with, "Yep, sounds good." And he's like, "Well, why'd you say that?" I'm like, hey, "If you don't want it, then don't do it. I'm not going to chase you down." But I mean, how should his clients feel if he won't invest to go get the best he can be? So I don't know. Maybe that's the Enneagram 8 in me. He wants to push, right, and get better.
Yeah. I mean, that's probably part of it. I think for me, one of the big things is understanding, not that I haven't mastered it all, but even the little that I've done about the learning process, um, that's how the process works,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, and we see it most clearly, I think, in sports, which you know better than I do.
Mm-hmm.
But like, no one gets good, like, so Kobe Bryant, right? There's stories about how he'd shoot what, like 1,000 free throws every
Yep.
day
Yep.
just to know that he can do it.
Yep.
And I have a buddy who played semi-pro ball, and
Mm-hmm.
he talks about how much they practice,
Mm-hmm.
and they practice like maybe 4 hours a day, 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the evening,
Mm-hmm.
and so the actual amount of time that they're putting
Mm-hmm.
in a given day is not that much. So for
Mm-hmm.
Kobe to go out, because for me, I thought like
Mm-hmm.
they're practicing 8 hours a day in the
Mm-hmm.
weight room. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
no, they're letting the body recover. But if
Mm-hmm.
you're going to be Kobe, if you're going to be Michael, if you're going to be LeBron, you have to put in the extra time.
Yep.
But the same thing is true for anybody who gets good at anything,
Mm-hmm.
right? The people who get to be in college on the college level, they're
Mm-hmm.
putting in more time than the people who are putting in who only played at the high school level,
Right.
you know?
Right.
And so I think for lots of us, there's a balance that has to be hit as
Yeah.
well. We have
Yeah.
families, we have kids, we have life going on. But if you're not doing those things and thinking about your process, then you're basically playing pickup.
Yep. That's right. And this is not a trial run. Is what's scary about that. This is people's lives we're talking about. I've been working with couples for almost 21 years, and they don't give you many misses. If you don't have some kind of change going on by about session 10, you're probably not going to have them. And you may end a family. It wouldn't be your fault, but I think our clients are worth giving it our very best.
Yeah.
And I can get specific. I just have a note here. It's like watching your videos is really key. It's the most unpopular thing on the planet. No one likes the sound of their own voice. I don't like mine either. But the reality is, you don't know what you're doing until you watch your videos. And people talk, when they say, "What model do you practice?" I'm always like, "What do you mean by that? Like, you've seen yourself doing that?" So get in a situation into some deep pain and get a client who's super resistant, and let's see how you dance. That's your model. Do you go cognitive in that moment? Do you become a teacher? And so you really won't know what you're doing until you're watching video. Something I really appreciate about you. And part of what you've helped the culture here is the video observation and how we do research with that. And so that can't be said enough. I think any practicing clinician should be watching themselves minimum once a month, even if it's just a 20-minute window. And that is not happening. I mean, most experienced people haven't watched themselves in 10 years,
If at all.
if at all. Grad school, if at all, then.
If,
Yeah.
if at all, then.
And that's a travesty. That cannot happen. You would
Yeah.
never have someone at Top Gun not watch. I was a college athlete. I can't fathom not watching. They would video us in the batting cages, and you would look and you would slow it down in slow motion. Even in Little League right now, they're doing that because they care. So we got to care enough to do the uncomfortable piece. And clients will let you do it, contrary to people's paranoia. Most people are fine with it for training purposes.
Yeah. I mean, I have it in my informed consent, and I think I'm going to say 10 just to be super overly, I don't know, gregarious.
Yeah.
Realistically, I probably have had 5 people, and I've seen about 170 clients.
Mm-hmm.
I've had 5 people who've said no.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So you do get no's
Right.
when you're videoing, but most of the time,
Uh-huh.
90+% of the time, people say yes.
Yeah.
And I mean, I know I catch things. I had a couple. Oh my gosh, that just blew up.
Mm-hmm.
I watched the tape. I still didn't know what I did.
Mm-hmm.
That I don't know. I didn't know what blew up.
Mm-hmm.
But the next time we were in session, something felt off,
Mm-hmm.
and then I caught it. And if I hadn't had the tape, I wouldn't have known. It would have been another just massive sort of blow up. So even stuff like that, you have to be watching. I think you have to be watching your tape.
You do, and yeah, you can't divorce this profession from research. And by research, I don't mean like some surveys or the math part. What I mean is the study of the process. And you've got to watch video. You've got to watch video to know what you're doing and to improve. It's an absolute. Yep.
Yeah. Um, so what's your own process? I know that you're doing the trainer circuit and you have your hands in lots of different things. So are you still sort of engaged in that? Are you doing that in a different way now? What's your process like?
Yeah, I'm a trainer with EFT. This is maybe my fourth year doing that, and so I travel and teach um, 10, 14 times a year. About 8 or 9 of those I do live consults, and so that's me coming in with someone else's clients and doing a demonstration in front of the group. And so I spend a lot of time with those videos watching myself. I like a lot of what I'm doing, and there's pieces of it I don't like what I'm doing, and I got to get better, And there's 2 or 3 pieces I'm actively working on right now. Pacing has never been easy for me. Um, you know, I'm a high volume thought guy, but not necessarily rhythmic. And so that's something I'm working on right now. It's an edge for me. I'm not a great reader in terms of reading a book and it makes me better. I wish I was. My wife can do that. She'll read whoever's book and get better the next week. My brain just doesn't process it that way. I've got to go be with people, so I'm pretty selective about continuing to be mentored and who I'll go travel and train with. I'll either spend my money or work for cheap to go spend some time with people who are better than me, and they push me and challenge me. And then this world is new for me with the podcasting world. I was just telling someone, I don't know who it was, just a minute ago that 3 months ago I'd never done one, and now this is like my 14th one I've done, and some on leadership and some on therapy, and that's been good for me. Um, and then I see 14 to 16 clients a week, about half and half, individuals and couples, and that's how I keep it moving, kind of circling in that way. Oh, then I do a lot of supervision as well, mostly online from around the country. I don't do as much local anymore. So looking at their cases and how I can be helpful with them, that helps me too. I think that's probably an under discussed part of this process. I think a lot of therapists, a lot of beginning therapists, it doesn't click until they're helping other people come along. So we see that in our neck of the woods with EFT. We have our trainings, and we always have a facilitator team. And a lot of times that's when a relatively new trainee gets it, is when they come back to facilitate for the first time. I think it provides distinctions. I think it clarifies it for them. So I think that's a great thing to do. I was actually, it's funny that you asked that question, if I could do it over again. I actually drew a model in my 7th year as faculty where, second or third year students would individually mentor first year students and help them come along through the process and sort of explain and that sort of thing. I think it would be mutually beneficial.
Yeah.
I think that could be a good thing.
Yeah, I think there's something that is fundamentally different about teaching something, you know, um, that helps you learn it on a whole new level.
Yep. It takes it out of the first order knowledge
Yeah,
and moves it into
yeah,
dynamic. Yeah.
absolutely.
And the funny thing, this sounds terrible, but my facilitators would be like, I wasn't getting this until I saw this person who's frankly worse than me doing this. And now it's really, really clear why I should never do that. And so Monday, I stopped doing that forever.
Yeah,
So I think there's just something to be said for looking at a process at multiple levels of it. That helps too.
yeah, I know. I'm definitely biased. I read there's a guy named George Lakoff. He's a cognitive linguist. One of his big points is language is always based off of experience. So the closer we get to that, the more understanding we have.
That's right.
And I think you see that. I think that's why tribes and groups work really well together because they have a collection
Yeah.
not of language but of experience, and then they can talk about it through their language.
That's right.
And that's what jargon is, right?
Right.
Jargon is the language that we have together because we have a shared experience. But what we know is that jargon makes people on the outside completely confused at best.
Mm-hmm.
At worst, they have a false understanding of it.
Mm-hmm.
They think they know, but then they go to do and they can't. It doesn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
Gotcha.
I love what you're saying.
That's good. I mean, it's like my last client this week, my 10 o'clock on, I don't know, Monday or Tuesday, whatever that was. At about 35 minutes in, we're talking about bonding and what makes a relationship secure. And they had tons of insight, and they were saying really good stuff. But I just noticed, man, this is philosophical. And the wife in this case in particular, she was just really confident. She's like, I absolutely know I can do this. And I'm like, well, let's do it then. And they weren't ready for that part. We're doing it right now. And so once we got in there, she couldn't in fact do it. Right? Her defenses took over. And then so we worked with that, and then eventually towards the end she did. And I'm like, man, if I had sent them home staying with that cognitive approach, I would have felt good about the session. But that's just like talking about riding a bike. You can't ride a bike until you feel what it's like for the pedals to propel you forward, and you find that balance. Like that sensation is what our clients are looking for. And we only give them that by getting our hands dirty into those places with them and helping them ride the bike the right way, in a corrective way. Of course, you can't get corrective until you get into the destructed part. So, but I think that can't be emphasized enough. And how can grad programs come alongside their students and help them do that is the $1,000,000 question.
All right, so I want to be respectful of your time.
All right.
We're winding down. Last question.
All right.
What do you think is on the forefront of the field? What's on the edge?
Man, that's a big one too. I'll be really curious what technology does. I'm an attachment theorist, so technology is a big part of the reason that EFT and attachment models are so popular, because technology has proven it with MRI studies, with blood glucose studies, that humans have attachment brains. So that's one thing. I think that might continue. I also think, technology like TMS, biofeedback might be interesting. I hope that's good. What I don't love about those treatments is they're not necessarily redemptive or reparative in terms of helping people where they actually got hurt. They're more like, let me help your brain get more efficient, which I think is also good. But I think there's going to be more interplay with that. Then I think there's going to be some problems. There already is. Grad programs have figured out, I don't know, I want to step on toes here. You're asking my opinion. I'm just going
Yeah.
to tell you. Grad programs can figure out, okay, we can make, $900,000 in the traditional way, which that sounds like a lot of money, but by the time you pay expenses, it's not. Or we can make $4 million if we make it part time and just do night classes, and we can hire a bunch of adjuncts only, and we can make a lot more money. And students are happier sometimes with that too. But I'm like, but hang on, this is incredibly personal, incredibly deep, incredibly intense work that we're doing. This is non-trivial, man. And so that's scary for me. I think that's the future risk. I also think things are going to go more and more and more online, which I think is neat, but it can divide us further. So I think there's going to be a convergence of technology helping and hurting us. But I don't think the fundamentals will ever really change. Mammals have attachment brains. And, I had my 11 o'clock today, who's a great person, really avoidant, as really all clients are. I mean, avoidance is one of the top 3 things you'll see across the board your whole career. Just avoid pain. The brain registers that as a threat cue in and of itself. I won't get started on that. But she just talks about one thing that helps her with anxiety is a weighted blanket. I'm like, great, man. Glad you got one. But what is that weighted blanket creating a sensation of? Human connection. It's simulating that to the body, right? So that's never going to change in the future. How do we create more authentic, secure connection between people? That's never going to change. So I think it's just going to be a question of how we do it.
Yeah, the thing that I think is fascinating about this field is we are on the edge of so many new breakthroughs. I think the next 20, 30 years, I think we'll see so many things will be really, really clearly defined. I think in some ways, we think we're much further than we actually are. I think this field is still in its infancy,
Hmm.
and technology will eliminate a lot of that. And I think that you're probably right. We're probably going to see a greater and greater divide. Um, but the thing that's inspiring is I think people in this field want to be better therapists.
Hmm.
I got an email yesterday from somebody I met at one of your trainings, and they were like, "Hey, I want to come down. If we can get coffee and talk about the model, like I'm trying to get better. When can we meet?" And it's like I hear those stories often.
Yeah.
People want to get better at
Yeah.
this,
Yeah, man.
and I think as therapists, clinicians, and researchers, we have to be seriously thinking about our own process in teaching, and are we actually meeting those goals, or are we
Yeah.
kind of doing to our students what a lot of therapists end up doing to their clients?
Yeah.
You
That's
know,
well said.
so
I was at a conference in Nashville a few years ago, and I was with Sue Johnson, and there was like 100 people in line to get her to sign her book. And myself, Kenny Sandifer, and I were standing there, and we were like, man, look at these people. Like, poor Sue, she's gonna get a hand cramp, and I'm like, yeah, she's a star, and Kenny kind of was existential, and he's like, no, these people are all stars, right? If you think about what kind of people are drawn to do this, it's special people that matter, that are doing this for the right reasons, and that's a pretty cool thing. So I think that's something that we have going for us as well, for sure.
yeah.
Yeah,
Well, thank you, Ryan.
you bet, man.
All right,